Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Slavery to Sonship Part 2. Um, as I was telling you, Dan, earlier, I am enough of a... So Arthur has made mention of the dynamic that, and other people I would imagine appreciate this aspect of when you look at the stuff that they teach and you teach it, do as much of it as you can in your own words. So if I were to have something as well, I would like people to be able to say that and say, hey, do it in your own words, because I want to make sure that you actually got it, that you actually understood it and can comprehend it and can make it available or practical or actionable for other people in their language. I have seen people, and I'm guilty of this as well, who have said, taken the redemptive gifts or the seven curses or Leviathan or whatever the case, and they've only just basically copy and pasted what Arthur said, or they printed what he said and published it under their own name with zero connection to Arthur. But that's not what we were made to do. I mean, we were made to be slaves, we were made to be slaves, not sons. No. We were made to be sons, not slaves. We were made to create and not just regurgitate what people have said, or what others have said. So it's good for us when we grasp it to get our own understanding of it and to be able to repackage it and not just barf out, oh, first head of Leviathan means this, and this, and the seven curses mean, this parallels this redemptive gift, and you only use basically the material that he put in without actually adding your own flair, the own sprinkle of fragrance of your own design. So, Dan, I don't know, do you know your redemptive gift at this point or not?
Yeah, service is me.
Okay. If you were to take the teaching or the concept and you were to add that little servanty bent to it, I mean, it would be so refreshing, and what it would bring, because servants they have high authority in at least two areas that I know of: to cleanse. So cleanse, especially they're really good with cleansing leaders. So if you have a leader, it's really good that they have servants around them. Or, I mean, I would just argue anybody and everybody in the body of Christ, the body of Messiah, is a leader on some level. And it's really good for them to have servants, to recognize the servants, to value the servants, and to champion the servants. Because the servants will not champion themselves. The servants will away from the limelight, and please don't shine the light on me and that sort of thing. But sometimes, and you can do this in private, you can do it in a very practical way. Take your servants out to dinner, connect with them, get to know them, who they are, get into their lives, tell them a little bit about yourself, be vulnerable, because they're really good about not having the guile. They're really good about not having the agenda, unlike the other six gifts. Prophets and teachers, and all the way down to mercies. When they do stuff typically there's some level of agenda at play. The servant has no agenda except to bless other people. They are so not them focused that they will sacrifice in very almost inappropriate ways, hurting themselves to take care of other people. I have seen this in action. My former mother-in-law, so my late wife's mother, who is still alive, is Redemptive Gift Servant, card-carrying servant. And she was very rudely mistreated for decades by people in her family. But if you had a talk with her, the woman does two things really well that I know of, at least. And there's more that she does, but two things that I like to highlight here. Number one, the woman prays like nobody's business. I don't know anybody that just is in their prayer closet, their bedroom becomes their prayer closet, and they pray without ceasing. This woman prays without ceasing. She is classic servant, and she will not assume, and she'll make sure that everybody else is provided for, even though she's in her, late 70s, early 80s. She will get up off her duff and go, we're sitting down to Thanksgiving. Even in her advanced age, she will get up and do the work of making sure The gravy's on the table, the cups are poured, do we have all the stuff that people like? Are people taken care of? Are they comfortable? And she'll just get up without complaining, even though she's advanced age, and do the work. Okay, so that's one dynamic. So she's got the prayer stuff. She's got the stuff that happens in the house where she just gets up and does without complaining. And then another dynamic that she's really good at, the woman does not have a green thumb. She has a green arm. She has two green arms. A story that I like to tell. When we first moved down here, she moved with us and she had her own bedroom over in the bedroom wing. And her favorite color is yellow. And she never asked for anything. But when you got to know her and you would just do those little things for her, it would bless her like, it would just bless her like nobody's business. So she would go out and garden. And she would garden tomatoes out here on our patio. We have a patio here that she would take and say, I would like to plant some stuff here, 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 and here. May I do it? And this was before she shattered her kneecap, and her femur and a bunch of other things. And we had some issues where she took the garbage can out when we had garbage service in the house. That was one of her chores. She would get up and walk the trash can at her advanced age down to the end of the curb. And I'm like, Mom, really, you don't need to do this. No, if you don't stop her and you don't lash her down, she'll get stuff done. There are just some people that have that drive, or it feels like they feel like that set of expectations is on them. Well, back to the drawing board about planting tomatoes. So she planted tomatoes. The tomatoes came up. The tomatoes were fatter than anybody else's in the neighborhood. And, like tomatoes upon tomatoes upon tomatoes. When she was living in Massachusetts, she planted tomatoes. And her effectiveness at planting tomatoes was so effective that the next season, tomato plants would come up out of the ground. She did not plant for that season, but she had 5 plants that were already starting to come up, and they were tomato plants. With the nightshade leaves and the nightshade aroma, which is very distinct. One of my favorite aromas on the planet is the smell of the nightshade, and it would just come up, and there were tomatoes. She didn't have to plant them, and it would do that year after year after year after year. And this is at the hands of the servant. The ground just responded. And we also had a situation, it was so intense, her capacity to work with the land, that I actually had gone out one day to on our patio out here where the tomatoes were planted, and I discerned a presence that I have never discerned before. And I knew exactly what it was because I've worked with the inverse and dealt with the inverse of that. I've dealt with a twisted seraph before, and you have dark cherubim, and then you have twisted seraphs, and we'll get into that at some point. Land dynamics and other stuff. So I knew I was standing in the presence of a seraph, and seraphs stand in the presence of worship of the king, and wherever they go, they respond to true worship. And the twisted variant does not like true worship, left the presence of the Lord, stood in the manifest presence of the Lord, and rejected standing in that presence. Because, as we know in Revelation, the dragon swept 1/3 of the stars away, 1/3 of all the host of heaven left, including the seraphim and the cherubim. So I knew I was standing in the presence of a seraph because when I worshiped, it felt like an explosion inside my spirit. An explosion was actually coming in the spirit from that location in the patio. Same thing. And it was just massive. So she would come and things would respond and the spirit realm would move over and over and over again. And one of the dynamics of the servant, their biggest heart and their best design is when they're at their best. It's not when they're serving other people. It's when they're serving the king and making a place that the king feels like he wants to dwell and he'll just come. And they won't do it with a hidden agenda of, okay, the Lord's going to come and move and I'm going to get something out of it. They never think about themselves. They're always concerned with, does the king approve? And they will take so many hits on the chin for their family. And when you have a male servant who is the husband and the father in a family, Like Joseph, the father of Jesus, he'll take hits on the chin again and again and again, and he has the free money of obedience, and he's the kind of person that will just go and go and go and go and go. Steve Rogers in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Captain America, Redemptive Gift of Servant. He was the ethical and moral heart and soul of the team. He was the one who held them together, and he was their compass. And he was the first to the fight and the last on the battlefield. And he was the one that said his tagline was, "I can do this all day." And he fought for his best friend, Bucky, who was a completely divided, messed up prophet. He fought for the heart and soul of the Avengers when the Sokovia Accords were present. Just again and again and again, you see those dynamics of the servant. There's no guile. And he said when he was talking to Erskine in the First Avenger, and I'm going off again on the MCU, but this is just what I do. I analyze redemptive gifts in film and pop culture. And he said to Erskine, because the Erskine said, "So you want to go overseas and kill some Nazis?" And this is my best Stanley Tucci Erskine German accent, and I love it. Stanley Tucci, one of my favorite actors, absolutely hands down. And he says, "So you want to go overseas and kill some Nazis?" And Steve was saying to him, "No, I don't." And he said, "So, why the 6 tries?" And Steve says, "I don't like bullies." And that's the servant. When you go after a servant's family, when you go after a teacher's family, when you go after a mercy's family, you're going to arouse their ire like few other gifts. When you mess with their people, when you mess with their clan, when you mess with their tribe, they will bring all of their stuff to bear, and you're going to feel the wrath of the servant, and it's unlike any other gift I have ever seen, because they want their family safe and provided for. And they live to see the king bring the tough cases, the family members, the porcupine hugging, which is another strength of the servant. They live to see those dynamics in place. And I had no idea that I was going to go off on the servant at this point in time, but I am so grateful I can bring honor to the tribe, because the tribe is worthy of honor, and the tribe gets missed because, like the atmosphere that we stand in, the oxygen that we breathe, the humidity that we curse until it keeps the forest fires from happening, and the weather patterns that create havoc until we need the rain in our aquifers. Like everyone else, we don't recognize them until they're not around, and the catastrophic effects of their absence are being felt. I give you the example because I'm going off on this, and I need to go off on this because this is just one of those things that I do. I teach on the gifts. The weather patterns were created on the second day. And on the second day, you dealt with the waters above and the waters below, and what the Hebrew calls the shamayim. It's the vault. It's the dome of the heavens. And calibrated the atmosphere, calibrated the exact amount of oxygen so that it was not too much and not too little. And it was just calibrated just right. And then the nitrogen, which is required for the plants to survive, that combination. And then you've got a bunch of other trace gases in the ozone layers and all the other stuff. And and then you create, as a result of all of that, those water and the wind masses moving, you have the clouds that move. And then you have the weather patterns that come in because of wind masses. And those weather patterns create a constant stirring up and cleansing of the atmosphere. And the weather patterns, the hurricanes, so let me just go ahead and hit hurricanes here. We want to pray away the rain and say, hurricane, you can't come here because you're going to cause catastrophic damage. Well, the reality is God takes all the raindrops and he places them exactly where he wants to. Am I saying that he curses cities or whatever the case with the weather patterns? That is a huge theological discussion that has many layers that I'm not going to get into just yet. But I want to highlight something specific. In Florida, my home state, Florida is basically a big slab of lime rock or a sandbar that sits out in the ocean, and the aquifers are massively critical to Florida's ecosystem. There are freshwater springs. Alexander Springs and Jenny Springs are two that I like to name off the top of my head that pump out millions of gallons of water per day, and they provide a life-giving source of fresh water to the surrounding ecosystem. The alligators in the state require fresh water. The water tables have gone down in Florida in a number of lakes, and the lakes themselves have actually gone down in terms of their height and their level and that sort of thing. But what's happening there is we don't realize how much we need the water until we really need the water, and the hurricanes actually replenish the aquifers with great amounts of water. And so what you deal with in the ecosystem is this dynamic of water that gets pumped in and out that is needed to survive the state. And part of how you do that is with these hurricanes that the Lord sends from the Cape Verde Islands across the doldrums, across the Atlantic Ocean, and into Florida, which provides life to the ecosystem. Unfortunately, it creates flood issues, it creates damage issues to property values and other stuff. So you have to kind of be careful, but you have to also understand that there's a dynamic where the king specifically wants to highlight the need for the ecosystem to be taken care of, and he uses hurricanes as one of his tools. I imagine the ecosystem around Lake Pontchartrain and New Orleans and some of the other areas in Texas that require, that Gulf Coast stuff. There's a design for the environment. There's a design for all of this heavy weather patterns. And that's the quality of the servant. And a whole lot of people do not understand this quality. And my heart is to see people understand the design, to see people understand how all the ecosystem fits together so they can bless the Lord and praise him for the good that he does, for the way he has set up the environment, the ecology. There's a reason why. So there are some of those key elements of the servant that I like to highlight. And for you, or Dan, being here, I think it's a blessing for you to hear how, even though you've got some of these aspects of the gift that may be cursed and aspects in the second day of creation that might be cursed, there's value even to them. And I'm not always certain that hurricanes are a curse or hurricanes are a warning shot, although I have heard that argument. I'm not going to get into it at this point in time, but I think there's something to it. So from there, we are going to move in to Slavery to Sonship Part 2. So hold on a second. I'm going to go ahead and stop this recording, and then we're going to start the second one.